Hello, in this video, I kind of wanted to continue to talk about some of the stuff that I was talking about before in terms of cross-ex and talking a little bit about how I think about you can answer cross-ex questions, because I think the last video I did was a lot more focused on asking cross-ex questions, and so I kind of wanted to do the other side. Obviously, this video isn't going to be able to cover like all the possible responses that you could give in a cross-ex, because every cross-ex is different. People can say or ask like anything, so obviously this isn't like this is the set of responses that you should have all the time, but it is a video to kind of think more about how you should think about answering cross-ex questions from a judge's perspective, ways that you can maybe more efficiently or accurately give information to judges, and just thinking about why you're doing or answering questions a certain way or like performing a certain way in a cross-ex. I think that overall, stylistically, you can always benefit from just being yourself and taking cross-ex really slow, and not really trying to just like get as fast as you can from the quickest responses. I think that a lot of things that teams misstep on, I'll talk about a little bit later, is not really just taking the time to kind of just like slow down and make sure that their response is as clear and as detailed and as efficient and strategic as possible. I think that you should really try to focus on the judge and not the other team, because sometimes I think when you are focused on the other team, you end up trying to be confusing or intentionally frustrating in ways that don't really make a point or like feed you strategically. And I just think that whatever you're doing within the debate should be done in a way and it's like done for a reason to help you kind of like win the debate itself. And I think that sometimes those types of strategies can work against that. I think cross-ex is like the most performative part of debate because of how head-on the dialogue is, and that can work for or against a lot of people, which makes cross-ex like really important, because it's like one of the only times where you're like directly talking back and forth with the other team. And so having that kind of moment to see how your arguments are directly interacting from like two different perspectives can be a really big point of clarity or a really big point of confusion for a judge watching, depending on how it goes. And so this is just kind of the thoughts that I have about ways that you can go about thinking through just your strategy and your mindset on cross-ex in order to get really consistently good at it. Okay, so the first thing that I'll say, kind of like what I was saying before, is this: you need to slow down. People tend to focus way too much on trying to like snap back with the fastest answer and thinking through a coherent, holistic like thought and response. I think that sometimes like people are focused way too much on being able to like repeat back information as like computers, or feeling like they just like know everything, that come off as confident. And I think that that is really both kind of like isn't the expectation I think a lot of people will have for you as judges. Like as judges that, for instance, like used to be debaters or kind of been in your positions or that have seen a lot of debates, they know that like, for instance, you aren't computers, that you aren't just like spitting out information. And although like you definitely should know what you're talking about and be like well researched on it and well rounded in understanding the point, that doesn't mean that you have an answer for every single question the other team asks. And I think being honest about that and being able to like take the cross-ex slower ends up a lot more strategic than trying to like intentionally just give the shortest, quickest response that is just like argumentative and doesn't get anybody anywhere in the cross-ex. Because I think that although you may be neutralized in that time and it may not be super efficient for them, that time is also your time, and so you're not maybe spending enough time maybe fleshing out arguments that you might need later on in the debate. I think that being confusing for the sake of being confusing is not really helpful, nor does it really help develop your argument. There are cases where it can be an example of the argument you're making, but I think even that execution should be intentional. I think there are times where, for instance, like not answering cross-ex questions, or like trying to prove a point through the way that you perform in cross-ex can be helpful in terms of executing your arguments. But I think that you should always do that in the context of thinking about like, you know, the audience that you're doing it in front of, i.e. like who is your judge, how could they interpret this moment, and what type of like clarity or understanding does it bring to the argument that you're doing? Does it really bring them in on the type of thing that you're kind of thinking about holistically, or does it kind of like alienate everyone? In that case, like what purpose is it serving in order for you to be able to forge your arguments? And so I think whatever tricks you try to pull in this area, you should mostly just focus on making sure that those tricks can be like executed in such a way that the judge clearly understands why you're making the moves that you're making. Otherwise, it can make the debate a lot more messy later on. And so I think like being able to practice those things outside of like the debate context, doing it in practice activities or different types of practices with your partner or your coach, can be really helpful for getting a better idea of how you should kind of like handle these moments. I think that people don't often enough like challenge the logic of how the questions their opponents are like forming, and challenging the way that they explain and interpret your evidence can really help you turn around the cross-ex even without asking a question in return. I think that like, for instance, I think sometimes people like, obviously when you're asking someone a cross-ex question, you're trying to push them to say something that is strategic strategic for you. And so in order for you to kind of refute that from the other end, I think that it is often good to kind of challenge the way that the team is interpreting your arguments and to get clear meaning on the types of questions that they're asking in order to fully understand the type of like strategic value that they want out of it. You should always be thinking, why is your opponent asking this question? Like, this isn't just to ask, right? There is something valuable about the answer that I'm going to give. And so you should kind of challenge the logic that they're using in order to get there. Oftentimes I see people read people's evidence back, or like read lines from their evidence and try to create an interpretation that, whether it's true or not to the evidence itself, is unstrategic for the other team. And I think oftentimes teams don't do enough just challenging how these questions come about and like changing their mindset in terms of thinking and assuming that whatever their opponent is saying is truth, rather than like thinking through the possible strategic value of opponent, like spinning evidence or spinning lines of your evidence to work against you. I think that in cross-ex, it's a really good time to speak through examples and make connections between your arguments. Doing things like pointing out a connection between the question being asked and arguments that you're making in other places can be really helpful. So when I say things like examples, I mean like two different places or two different types of examples. The first are like examples as in like, being able to explain the historical or the historical presence of things that are in your speeches, the historical examples that are in your speeches, the kind of like analogous situations that you're making in order to explain your arguments, etc. This is a place to really kind of like break those things down and show the judge how they're operating, and in case they either missed it and just the kind of the miss of your speech, or if you're able to just use it as a point of clarity to show the applicability of that example and relationship to other parts of the flow and other things that are happening within the debate. I think can be really useful. But the other type of example I mean is just like really performative examples. So if you're making an argument about how the way that we think about, or the way that we make decisions about like the value of like certain people or certain ideas, then making arguments about how the opponent's questions, the way they position or position themselves in cross-ex, as an example of like the critiques or the types of offense that you're making at other places, can be like really essential to being able to like help judges click with your arguments and make them understand how the argument has an effect on the way that we debate and like kind of like the stakes of what's happening within the debate. I think like having moments in cross-ex where you really tell your judge to mark your arguments or to pay attention to points that are really important places of explanation are really good, because you can get specific about an argument you think that can really help you win the debate. I think there are definitely times where people do this and it's a little bit oversaturated, or doesn't actually like really pertain to like the crux of the debate. But I think when it does, this is like a place where you really want to sit down and let your judge know and communicate with them that in order for you to get to a place where the argument that you're trying to get out of it is like really clear and really specific to the context that's happening within the debate. Hopefully this video was helpful for you thinking about ways that you can answer cross-ex questions and the type of mindset that you should have going into a cross-ex. I think that it's kind of hard to think about like ways that I can give you advice that is really specific to every single context, but hopefully this video was helpful, at least giving you a mindset to think about when you're trying to go over the objectives of your opponent's cross-ex and trying to think of the types of things that you should be addressing when answering your own. Thanks.